What are gods? A Mystrikal take on one of humanity's most persistent superstitions. Part 1 of 12. Why definition comes first. Before someone can honestly say that, at minimum they provisionally do not believe in gods, or if they prefer stronger wording, that they provisionally believe gods do not exist, they must first ask a deceptively simple question. What exactly is a god supposed to be? That question matters far more than many people realize, because most debates about gods, divinity, the supernatural, faith, atheism, agnosticism, religion, and spirituality collapse before they even begin. Not because one side has already won, but because both sides are often arguing over a word whose meaning has never been properly pinned down. A Christian may mean a perfect, personal, all-powerful creator. A Hindu philosopher may mean Brahman as the ultimate reality. A pantheist may mean the universe itself. A deist may mean a distant first cause. A polytheist may mean limited supernatural agents with particular domains. A symbolic theologian may mean something closer to moral depth, poetic orientation, or existential meaning. And a person on Facebook, God help us, metaphorically speaking of course, may mean whatever definition gets them through the next argument without having to defend the previous one. For Mystrikism, this matters because we are not simply interested in rejecting unsupported claims. We are interested in understanding them properly before provisionally dismissing, suspending, revising, or dismantling them. Mystrikism is not a lazy sneer at religion, it is a rational alternative to it, grounded in scientific honesty, naturalism, ethical concern, humility before the unknown, and naturalized spirituality without supernatural baggage. It values the search for the best current provisional approximation of objective truth, while recognizing that all human knowledge is limited, revisable, incomplete, and vulnerable to error. For this reason, our epistemic foundations include reliability, objectivity, verification, reproducibility, relevance, trustworthiness, transparency, empiricism where applicable, logical coherence, and falsifiability, ultimately validated by explanatory and predictive power. So if gods are one of humanity's most important and prominent claims about reality, then we should anatomize them carefully, not with a blunt cleaver, but with a scalpel made of definitions, evidence, logic, and analytical philosophy. A broad mystical definition of a god would be something like this. A god is any being, force, principle, mind, agency, ultimate reality, sacred power, cosmic ground, supernatural entity, metaphysical source, or worship-worthy object treated as divine, sacred, supremely authoritative, cosmically explanatory, morally commanding, or existentially ultimate. That definition is deliberately broad because human god concepts are broad. They do not all look like an old bearded monarch floating above the clouds, issuing commandments and smiting people with suspiciously human, emotional issues. Some gods are personal, some are impersonal, some are singular, some are plural, some are creators, some are not. Some are morally perfect, some are morally less than, some are said to intervene in history, some are said to underlie existence without doing anything recognizably person-like at all. Some are objects of worship, some are metaphysical abstractions, and some are basically poetry wearing the robes of a Jedi. But broadness must not become vagueness. That is the trap. If a god is defined so broadly as to include anything awe-inspiring, mysterious, powerful, meaningful, natural, emotional, or difficult to explain, then the word has become a fog machine rather than a concept. A mystic can feel awe under the Milky Way, reverence for the unknown, moral seriousness toward suffering, and a powerful feeling of connection to life, without pretending any of that implies a supernatural person, a supernatural realm, or a divine will hiding behind the misty curtain. Mystrikism is especially careful here. The unknown is not a god. The unknown possesses no mind, no agency, no personality, no intention, no awareness, no agenda, no divine nature, no supernatural status. To a mystrik, the unknown is simply a natural aspect of reality beyond our present comprehension and awareness. It humbles us, it inspires us, its magnitude gives us perspective, but it does not love us, judge us, command us, forgive us, punish us, answer prayers, or leave behind moral instructions that look strangely like the norms of the cultures that wrote them. What are gods? Part 2 of 12. Broad, narrow, and moving God definitions. So we need at least two definitions. In the broad comparative sense, God refers to the entire family of divine or quasi-divine concepts humans have contrived, inherited, worshipped, feared, defended, refined, symbolized, or philosophized about. In the narrower classical theistic sense, God usually refers to a supreme personal being who is said to be omnipotent, omniscient, perfectly good, eternal, necessary, creator of the universe, morally authoritative, and worthy of worship. That narrower definition is especially relevant when debating Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and much of Western philosophical theology. It is also the version most vulnerable to the classic philosophical problems: evil, hiddenness, incoherent attributes, unanswered prayers, poor evidence, divine command morality, scriptural contradiction, and the obvious human fingerprints all over supposedly divine revelation. This distinction matters because many religious arguments cheat by changing definitions midstream. Someone may begin by arguing for a vague first cause, then quietly treat that as if they have established the personal God of their childhood religion. They argue for something beyond the universe, then speak as though they have proven a loving Father, a miracle worker, a moral lawgiver, a listener of prayers, and somehow the author of one particular holy text, and one only, instead of the thousands of divine claims made across history. That is just metaphysical pickpocketing. A cause is not automatically a mind. A mystery is not automatically a God. A seeming beginning is not automatically a creator. A creator is not automatically good. A powerful being is not automatically worthy of worship. And even if some strange intelligence existed behind reality, that would not automatically validate any religion currently hawking certainty from the back of a truck. A mystrikal approach therefore asks, what exactly is being claimed? Is this God personal or impersonal, natural or supernatural, inside the universe, outside the universe, identical with the universe, or somehow both beyond and within it? Does it think? Does it choose? Does it act? Does it know? Does it care? Does it intervene? Does it answer prayers? Does it issue moral commands? Does it punish disbelief? Does it reveal itself? Does it create matter, consciousness, morality, life, or purpose? Is it supposed to be perfect? Is it falsifiable? What would count as evidence against it? What would count as evidence for it? For example, consider a God claim that is potentially falsifiable. This God will cause all sincere prayers for rain to be answered within 3 days. If repeated, controlled tests consistently fail to show this effect, the claim can be considered disconfirmed. In contrast, a claim such as, God is an imperceptible presence that answers prayers in ways that are indistinguishable from coincidence and will always act for a greater purpose beyond human understanding, offers no possibility for falsification. If the answer is always nothing could count against it, then we are not dealing with a serious explanatory hypothesis. We are dealing with an unfalsifiable proposition in the shape of a belief that survives only by avoiding real scrutiny. What are gods? Part 3 of 12. Personal, impersonal, pantheistic, and panentheistic gods. Polytheistic gods create a different analytical situation. Zeus, Thor, Isis, Krishna, Odin, Quetzalcoatl, Amaterasu, and countless other divine figures are not all meant to be omnipotent, omniscient, morally perfect creators of everything. Many are limited agents with specialized domains, distinct personalities, flaws, realms of influence, relationships, histories, and mythic functions. Criticizing them as though each one is meant to be the god of classical monotheism would be sloppy. But that does not give them a free pass. If they are claimed to literally exist, then they too require evidence. If they act in the world, where are the reliable traces? If they answer rituals, where are the reproducible patterns? If they govern nature, why did natural science keep replacing divine agency with physics, chemistry, biology, geology, meteorology, and neuroscience? Ancient thunder gods were not disproved by one dramatic philosophical or scientific knockout. They were made unnecessary by better explanations. Lightning did not become less magnificent when we stopped calling it divine anger. It became more interesting. Impersonal God concepts are more slippery. Brahman, the Tao, pantheistic divinity, panentheistic models, cosmic consciousness, or abstract ultimate reality claims are often not gods in the everyday personal sense. They do not always involve a heavenly agent making decisions. Some are better understood as metaphysical ultimates, cosmic principles, or symbolic ways of naming the elements and depths of reality. A mystic should not lazily treat these as identical to a personal creator, but we should still ask what work the word God is doing. If God just means reality, why not say reality? If God means the universe, why not say universe? If God means awe, why not say awe? If God means moral aspiration, why not say moral aspiration? If no additional testable content is being added, then God may be functioning as an emotional intensifier rather than an explanation. And while poetry has its place, poetry should not be smuggled into public reasoning as though it has earned the authority of evidence. Pantheism is a good example. If someone says, God is the universe, I do not need to become dramatically outraged. I can simply ask, is this a literal claim that the universe is conscious, intentional, sacred, or worthy of worship? Or is it a poetic way of expressing awe toward nature? If it is poetic, that's awesome. Pardon the pun. Mystrikism already has a naturalized, non-supernatural spirituality of awe without needing to rename the universe God. If it is literal, then the claim needs support. What evidence shows that the universe as a whole is a mind? What evidence shows that it has intention? What evidence shows that worship is an appropriate response? If none is provided, pantheism risks becoming ordinary naturalism with incense and tea candles. Panentheism, the idea that the universe is somehow within God, but God exceeds the universe, often tries to preserve both immanence and transcendence. It can sound sophisticated, and sometimes it is. But sophistication is not evidence. A concept can be elegant, subtle, emotionally satisfying, and still utterly unsupported. The more abstract a God becomes, the harder it is to disprove, but also the less it tends to explain. A God that never clearly acts, never clearly speaks, never clearly reveals, never clearly predicts, never clearly distinguishes itself from nature, and never clearly risks falsification, may survive criticism, but only by receding into conceptual mist. At some point, the God has not been defended, it has just been diluted. What are gods? Part 4 of 12. Classical monotheism and its major problems. Classical monotheism is the great heavyweight target because it makes the grandest claims. It does not simply say there is something mysterious or ultimate. It says there is a supreme personal being who created reality, knows everything, can do anything logically possible, is perfectly good, desires a relationship, grounds morality, responds to prayer, and is worthy of worship. That is an enormous claim. Not a small private preference, not a harmless metaphor. No, merely, I feel there is something more. It is a claim about the structure of reality, the origin of existence, the foundation of ethics, the meaning of life, the destiny of persons, and often the eternal torture of those who disagree or were never given a choice. A claim of that size does not get to travel even in cargo class with this apparent scarcity of evidence. The problem of evil lands hardest here. If a God is not all-powerful, not all-knowing, or not perfectly good, then suffering may not contradict that God. A limited deity could fail. A morally mixed deity could allow cruelty. A distant creator could be indifferent. But the classical God is different. If God knows every instance of suffering, has the power to prevent any suffering he chooses, and is perfectly good, then the world we observe becomes deeply problematic. Not just bumps, scarps, and ordinary hardship, but childhood cancer, parasitic blindness, earthquakes crushing infants, animal predation across hundreds of millions of years, genetic diseases, dementia, torture, famine, abuse, and the immense suffering of sentient life long before humans arrived to allegedly sin badly enough to deserve the mess. The usual replies, free will, soul-making, mysterious greater goods, may explain some suffering, but they strain badly under the sheer scale, randomness, and biological brutality of the real world. Nature looks exactly like what we would expect from indifferent processes, not careful moral design. Divine hiddenness is another serious wound. If a perfectly loving God exists and wants a relationship with sapient beings, why is sincere non-belief so common? Why are honest seekers scattered across incompatible religions, cultures, and philosophies? Why does birthplace predict belief so strongly? Why does God's communication look so much like human tradition, social inheritance, psychology, and textual confusion? A loving parent who hides from their children, then allows eternal consequences for failing to find them, would not be called mysterious. He would be called a negligent abuser. The more a religion insists that belief matters, the more divine hiddenness becomes morally and epistemically troubling. A God who wants to be known but communicates worse than a mildly competent schoolteacher is not an obvious candidate for perfect wisdom. The moral argument for God also needs thoughtful handling. Many believers claim that morality requires God, but this is far from obvious. Mystrikism grounds ethics in the welfare and suffering of sapient beings, sentient life, and ecosystems. It treats morality as rationally guided, yet ultimately subjectively grounded in chosen values and aims, but ethics as something we can pursue with increasing objectivity through evidence, reason, consequences, and inferential analysis. We do not need a divine commander to know that torture causes suffering, lies corrode trust, cruelty damages minds and communities, and compassion generally improves well-being. The question is not, did a God forbid this? The better question is, what does this do to life forms capable of flourishing or suffering? Divine command theory regularly makes morality worse, not better, because it risks turning goodness into obedience. If something is good only because God commands it, morality becomes authoritarian preference. If God commands it because it is good, then goodness is not dependent on God after all. Either way, the claim that morality collapses without gods is much less impressive than advertised. What are gods? Part 5 of 12. Religious experience and naturalized spirituality. The freedom of religious experience is worth treating with respect, but not surrender. People believe they have intense experiences. They describe feelings like presence, awe, unity, terror, love, transcendence, conviction, guidance, revelation, and transformation. Mystrics do not necessarily need to mock these experiences or brand everyone delusional. Human consciousness is deep, strange, emotional, embodied, and culturally shaped. But the interpretation of an experience is not identical to the experience itself. A Christian may feel Jesus. A Muslim may feel Allah, a Hindu may feel Krishna, a Buddhist may experience non-self, a secular person may feel existential awe under the stars, a grieving person may feel the presence of the dead. The sincerity of an experience does not establish the truth of the explanation attached to it. The brain interprets experience and creates meaning. That does not make its impressions divine revelation. This is where Mystrikism's naturalized spirituality becomes important. We do not deny awe, we retake it. We do not deny wonder, we savor it. We do not deny moments that surpass the ordinary in the emotional, psychological, poetic, and ontological sense. Mystrics simply refuse to staple supernatural claims onto it without verified evidence. A person can be moved to tears by music, humbled by deep time, stunned by the elegance of evolution, overwhelmed by love, silenced by sadness, or filled with amazement beneath the Milky Way, and none of that requires gods. In fact, for a mystic, its naturalness makes it more beautiful, not less. It means this universe, through matter, energy, life, mind, culture, cognitive organs, and nervous systems, can produce beings capable of looking back at reality in astonishment. That is not just chemicals in the dismissive sense. That is, chemicals become Mozart, grief, ethics, mathematics, kindness, and awe. No ghost required. Reality is already more than capable of showing off. What are gods? Part 6 of 12. Gods as psychology, culture, scripture, and metaphor. Gods also need to be understood psychologically and culturally. Human minds are agency detection engines. We are quick to see intention, faces, patterns, purpose, and seemingly hidden causes. That tendency probably helped our ancestors survive. Better to mistake wind in the grass for a predator than a predator for wind in the grass. But the same tendency also makes us vulnerable to imagined agents, spirits in storms, gods behind harvests, demons behind illness, fate behind coincidence, cosmic justice behind random events. Add fear of death, tribal ostracism, social unity, moral enforcement, ritual, authority, storytelling, and childhood indoctrination, and God concepts become highly virulent and transmissible. This does not by itself disprove every God claim, but it explains why God beliefs are so common without needing to assume they are true. The success of an idea in human culture is not the same as its truth. Superstitions spread too, so do rumors, ideologies, scams, and bad memes with suspiciously confident fonts. Scripture and revelation add another layer. If a God reveals truth, we should expect clarity, consistency, moral depth, and reliable transmission. Instead, we often find historic writings depicting the cultures that produced them. Tribal loyalties, patriarchal assumptions, purity codes, mythic cosmologies, miracles conveniently located in the unverifiable past, moral commands that date badly, and interpretive traditions endlessly fighting over what the all-knowing communicator supposedly meant. This is not what perfect revelation looks like. It is what human literature looks like. Some of it may be beautiful. Some of it may contain wisdom, some of it may be historically fascinating, but moral beauty and literary power do not turn a text into divine speech, much less fact. Shakespeare is insightful and meaningful. We do not build churches to Hamlet. A mystic should also be alert to the retreat into metaphor. When challenged, some believers soften their God. God stops being a literal interventionist being and becomes love, meaning, mystery, ground, depth, community, consciousness, or the feeling one gets when the choir hits the right note. That may be emotionally meaningful, but it changes the claim. If God is a metaphor, then arguments for God's literal existence no longer apply. If God is literal, then metaphorical escape routes do not rescue the claim from evidence. The believer must pick a lane. One cannot use a literal God to command morality, threaten judgment, answer prayer, and validate Scripture, then switch to a symbolic God when asked for evidence. What are gods? Part 7 of 12. The Mystrikal position and the burden of justification. Mystrikism's position, then, is not, I know no gods exist. That would overstate things. Our position is cleaner, humbler, and stronger. God propositions have not met the standards required for belief. They have not been reliably verified. They are, more often than not, unfalsifiable. They lack the validation of explanatory and predictive power. They are culturally variable. They are psychologically explainable. They often conflict with one another. Their strongest versions face serious philosophical problems, and their weakest versions often become too vague to matter. Therefore, for mystrics at least, because we provisionally do not know, we provisionally do not believe. That is not closed-mindedness. That is disciplined openness. A mind is not open because it lets anything in. A mind is open when it is willing to change in response to good evidence. This distinction between agnosticism and non-theism is central. Agnosticism concerns knowledge. I do not know that no gods exist. Non-theism concerns belief. I do not currently believe gods exist. These are perfectly compatible. In fact, they are philosophically tidy. I can be agnostic about ultimate metaphysical possibilities while being non-theistic toward actual God claims, because such claims still require evidence. I do not need absolute disproof to conditionally withhold belief. I do not need to search every corner of reality before declining to accept unsupported claims. If someone says there is a dragon in the garage, a fairy in the bloodstream, a demon behind illness, or a god outside space and time who nonetheless cares deeply about bedroom behavior, the burden is on the claimant to provide reasons proportionate to the claim. Until then, disbelief is not arrogance. It is merely intellectual hygiene. The burden of justification applies especially strongly to gods because God beliefs are not harmless abstractions floating politely in a philosophy seminar. They shape laws, families, education, sexuality, medicine, politics, identity, war, guilt, shame, hope, fear, and moral authority. A claim that tells people how to live, whom to love, what to eat, what to wear, when to suffer, when to obey, and what happens after death must be held to a brutal standard of evidence. Not because mystrics are trying to be unkind, because consequences matter. A tiny belief can do enormous damage when wrapped in divine authority. If a person says, "This is my personal symbol," great, but if they say, "The creator of the universe commands this, and you must obey," then the evidentiary bar should now reside in low Earth orbit. This is also why analytical philosophy matters as a key element of Mystrikism's integrated principles of science. Science is not simply microscopes, lab coats, and graphs on translucent screens in the bridge of a Hollywood spaceship. It also depends on conceptual clarity. Before we can test a claim, we need to know what the claim means. Before we can evaluate evidence, we need to define the target. Before we can assess coherence, we need to identify the attributes being proposed. Philosophical analysis helps us notice category errors, equivocations, contradictions, hidden assumptions, circular reasoning, unfalsifiable escape clauses, and emotional substitutions for argument. In God debates, this is absolutely vital. Without analytical clarity, God becomes a suitcase into which anything can be packed and from which anything can be pulled when convenient. The Mystrikal method is therefore not anti-theistic per se. It is anti-confusion. It says, define your terms, identify your claims, separate metaphor from ontology, separate awe from agency, separate morality from command, separate mystery from evidence, separate cultural inheritance from verifiable truth, and separate emotional certainty from public testable justification. Then we can talk. Not before. What are gods? Part 8 of 12. A practical taxonomy of God concepts. A useful Mystrikal taxonomy might divide God concepts into several overlapping types. First, personal supreme gods, the all-powerful, all-knowing creator types, such as Yahweh, Allah, the classical Christian God, or other supreme creator gods. Second, personal limited gods, polytheistic beings with realms, powers, conflicts, and stories, such as Zeus, Odin, Thor, Athena, Apollo, Isis, or Anubis. Third, deistic gods, creators who start the system and then do not intervene, such as the watchmaker god, the distant creator of classical deism, or a non-intervening first cause. Fourth, pantheistic gods, creator gods who become the universe itself, combining deism's non-intervention with pantheism's identification of divinity with nature or reality, such as a creator united with creation, a god who becomes the whole cosmos, or a divine source that no longer exists separately from the universe. Fifth, pantheistic gods, divinity identified with nature or the universe, such as God as nature, Spinoza's God, or the universe treated as divine. Sixth, panentheistic gods, divinity that includes yet exceeds the universe, such as some versions of process theology, some Hindu-influenced God concepts, or a God understood as both within reality and beyond it. Seventh, impersonal ultimates, non-personal God concepts, where God refers not to a divine person, but to something abstract resembling cosmic or universal order, the underlying source or foundation of reality, ground of being, or an ultimate unity behind reality. Examples might include Brahman in particular interpretations, the Tao, the One, or abstract ultimate reality language. Eighth, symbolic gods, poetic, moral, or existential language not necessarily meant as a literal supernatural claim, such as God as love, justice, hope, conscience, nature's beauty, or the mystery of existence. This may slightly resemble Mystrikism's reverence for the unknown, in the sense of approaching mystery with respect and awe, but Mystrikism does not turn the unknown into a god, a mind, a person, or a supernatural authority. Mystery gives us purpose, humility, and perspective without worship. Ninth, psychological gods, internalized authority figures, projections, archetypes, or emotional constructs, such as Jungian archetypes, parental projections, inner judges, savior figures, or the voice in your heart. 10th, political gods. Divine concepts used to legitimize hierarchy, law, nation, tribe, priesthood, monarchy, or moral control, such as divine kingship, God-given monarchy, national gods, sacred empires, or religiously justified legal systems. These categories overlap, but they help prevent one of the oldest tricks in the religious book: defending one version and emotionally cashing in on another. For example, a person may defend a deistic first cause in debate, pray to a personal god in private, quote scripture as moral authority in politics, retreat to metaphor when challenged, and claim mystical experience as evidence when cornered. A mystic should gently but firmly refuse to let all those versions blur together. Which God are we discussing? The cosmic engineer, the loving father, the tribal lawgiver, the metaphysical ground, the universe wearing a halo, the creator dissolved into creation, the poetic symbol, the voice in your heart? The answer changes the argument. If the target moves every time it is examined, that is not a real mystery. It is just an evasive definition. What are gods? Part 9 of 12. Common arguments for God and their limits. One of the most common theistic claims is that God explains why there is something rather than nothing. But even here, caution is needed. Suppose, for the sake of argument, that the universe requires an explanation beyond itself. Why think that explanation is personal? Why think it is conscious? Why think it is singular? Why do you think it is good? Why think it cares about humans? Why do I think it inspired a book? Why think it listens to prayer? Why think it hates the same people your culture taught you to dislike? A cosmological argument, even if it worked, might get you to some kind of necessary reality or unknown explanatory ground. It does not get you all the way to church, mosque, synagogue, temple, scripture, priesthood, heaven, hell, commandments, miracles, or divine surveillance. That bridge is usually built out of wishful thinking and inherited theology. Fine-tuning arguments have the same issue. Even if the universe's life-permitting structure were surprising, a designer is not the only possible explanation. Unknown physics, multiverse hypotheses, selection effects, deeper necessity, or brute fact may remain possible. But more importantly, even if design were inferred, the designer need not be the god of any religion. It could be limited, indifferent, incompetent, experimental, plural, dead, non-moral, simulated, or nothing like a worship-worthy being. The fine-tuning argument also faces the awkward problem that most of the universe is lethally hostile to life. If the universe is designed for us, it is a funny sort of design, like building a mansion that is 99.999999999% acid, vacuum, radiation, and darkness, then pointing proudly at one damp cupboard where mold can survive. The argument from life has weakened as science has advanced. Life was once treated as requiring a special vital force. Now biology explains life through chemistry, evolution, genetics, metabolism, selection, self-organization, and deep time. Abiogenesis remains an open scientific question in many details, but we do not yet know every step does not equal, therefore, God. That is the old God of the gaps move, and history has not been kind to it. The gaps keep shrinking, and the gods living in them keep having to relocate. A mystic does not need to pretend science has answered everything. We only need to notice the pattern. Natural explanations keep earning their keep. Supernatural explanations keep issuing checks that inevitably bounce, or worse, put us into overdraft. Evolution is especially devastating to many traditional God concepts because it explains design-like complexity devoid of paranormal foresight. It shows how eyes, wings, immune systems, instincts, cooperation, predation, beauty, and horror can emerge through natural mechanisms over immense time. It also exposes the moral strangeness of creation by natural selection if it is steered by a perfect deity. Evolution is not a tender artisan. It is wasteful, blind, bloody, and indifferent. It builds through death, mutation, competition, parasitism, extinction, and epic suffering. If a god used evolution, then that god chose a method soaked in pain and blood long before humans existed. Again, this fits naturalism beautifully. It fits a perfectly good designer rather badly. The argument from consciousness is another popular refuge. Consciousness is indeed mysterious. Subjective experience is one of the great frontiers of philosophy and science. But mystery is not a blank check payable to theology. Saying consciousness is hard to explain, therefore God, explains very little. How does a disembodied consciousness work? How does it interact with matter? Why is divine consciousness easier to explain than biological consciousness? If minds require a prior mind, then why does God's mind not require explanation? If God's consciousness can be basic, why can't consciousness or proto-consciousness be natural in some way we do not yet understand? A mystic will admit that consciousness is marvelously complicated, and that the term is an emergent placeholder, as consciousness, just like abiogenesis, is at present beyond our full understanding. Just like germ theory was only a few generations ago. No need to stuff a deity into the explanatory gap, like a folded paper napkin under an unsteady table leg. The same applies to meaning and purpose. Theists often ask, without God, what is the purpose of life? But this assumes the purpose must be externally assigned to be real. That is not obvious. A hammer's purpose is assigned by minds. A person's purpose can be discovered, chosen, built, revised, shared, and lived. Mystrikism grounds purpose in inquiry, justice, awe, growth, and the flourishing of life. We seek to understand the unknown, reduce suffering, increase well-being, and savor the splendor of existence. That purpose is no less meaningful because it is not dictated from outside the universe. In fact, there is something more mature about creating and refining purpose honestly than pretending an invisible authority has handed us one ready-made. A mystic can also say this: if purpose requires a divine mind, then God's purpose either comes from himself or from something beyond himself. If it comes from himself, then self-generated purpose is possible. If it comes from beyond himself, then God is not ultimate. Either way, the claim that humans cannot have purpose without divine assignment collapses. We are meaning-making beings in a meaning-responsive world. We love, build, grieve, learn, protect, wonder, and choose. That is the raw material of a life. What are gods? Part 10 of 12. Worship, Hell, Prayer, and Miracles. The worship-worthiness of gods is a separate question again. Even if a god existed, why worship it? Existence does not imply moral authority. Power does not imply goodness. Creation does not imply ownership. Intelligence does not imply compassion. A being could create a universe and still be morally unworthy. A being could be powerful and still be cruel. A being could demand worship, thereby revealing insecurity rather than greatness. The classical god is often described as needing nothing, yet somehow desiring praise, obedience, submission, and belief under threat of punishment. That looks less like perfect goodness and more like galactic narcissism, unless heavily reinterpreted. A mystic does not automatically grant credibility, let alone worship worthiness. It must be earned ethically, not assumed metaphysically. Hell, in particular, is morally catastrophic. Any god who permits eternal torture for finite errors, sincere disbelief, cultural difference, or failure to accept insufficient evidence would not be perfectly just. Such a being would be morally monstrous. No amount of mystery rescues infinite punishment for finite creatures with limited cognition, limited evidence, inherited cultures, trauma, confusion, and fallible minds. A decent human would not allow someone to burn forever for being unconvinced. If a god does, then that god is not morally superior to us. He is beneath us. If hell is metaphorical, then say so and stop using it as a threat. If it is literal, then the moral case against that god is overwhelming. Prayer also deserves scrutiny. If prayer works in the world, there should be detectable patterns. If it does not produce detectable effects, then it may still function psychologically, socially, or emotionally, but not as evidence of divine intervention. People pray across religions, often with equal sincerity and contradictory expectations. Some recover, some die, some succeed, some fail. The outcomes look like life. Believers count the hits and reinterpret the misses. If the answer is yes, God answered. If the answer is no, God had a plan. If nothing happens, God is mysterious. That is not evidence. That is an unfalsifiable interpretive loop. Comfort may be real, but comfort is not confirmation. Miracles face similar problems. A miracle claim must overcome not only the improbability of the event itself, but also the probability of error, exaggeration, fraud, misinterpretation, poor documentation, transmission chain distortion, telephone or Chinese whispers, cultural pressure, biased reasoning, and faulty memory, perception, and cognition. Claims of resurrections, virgin births, walking on water, splitting moons, flying horses, faith healings, weeping statues, talking donkeys, exorcisms, Marian apparitions, Hindu milk-drinking statues, miraculous relics, and vague answered prayer stories all run into the same basic problem. The claim is virtually always far stronger than the evidence offered for it. We know people make mistakes, embellish, and mythologize. We do not know that natural law is suspended by divine will, so the rational burden is heavy. The more extraordinary the claim, the more extraordinary the evidence needs to be. Ancient miracle stories in pre-scientific texts do not meet that standard. Nor do most modern anecdotes of this nature survive superficial, let alone careful scrutiny. What are gods? Part 11 of 12. What religion provides, and what Mystrikism can preserve without superstitions. This does not mean Mystrikism despises religious people. That point matters. We critique ideas, especially harmful, dishonest, unfalsifiable, or authoritarian ideas. But people are complicated. Religion can provide community, comfort, identity, ritual, charity, support for grief, art, music, moral language, and continuity. These human goods are real. The Mystrikal critique is that none of them requires the supernatural to be true. A false belief can still have social uses. A myth can still carry emotional meaning. A ritual can still help a person grieve. A community can still feed the hungry. But usefulness is not truth. We can preserve the human goods without preserving the metaphysical mistake. Mystrikism and many secular philosophies recognize the real needs that religion often meets and advance alternative ways to fulfill them. Community relationships and belonging can be found through secular clubs, shared values, volunteer groups, and local social organizations. Ritual and meaning can emerge from personal or collective milestones, creative gatherings, or shared traditions that mark time, loss, joy, and struggle without appealing to supernatural explanations. Grief can be supported through secular support groups, compassionate counseling, and ceremonies that honor life honestly. Ethical systems can be built on empathy, evidence, and the mutual well-being of sentient creatures, not on godly command. Purpose and awe are available in the search for knowledge, art, science, love, and the natural beauty of reality. Creativity, charity, and social support do not require divine sanction. In a mystical or secular context, all of these can be developed intentionally, often with greater honesty, inclusivity, and adaptability, affirming that significance and connection are human achievements, not supernatural gifts. In that sense, Mystrikism is not trying to strip life bare. Quite the opposite. It is trying to remove the false ceiling. Traditional religion often says awe must point upward to God. Mystrikism says awe can open outward into reality. Religion often says morality descends from heaven. Mystrikism says ethics emerges from the needs, suffering, flourishing, and interdependence of living systems. Religion often says mystery belongs to God. Mystrikism holds that mystery belongs to and is a natural aspect of reality, and that reality does not need to be personified to be sublime. Religion often says humility means bowing before divine authority. Mystrikism says humility means admitting what we do not know and refusing to pretend. What are gods? Part 12 of 12. The final Mystrikal take. So finally, what are gods? They are many things. They are imagined agents, cultural symbols, metaphysical hypotheses, moral authorities, tribal protectors, cosmic parents, fear management devices, poetic personifications, political tools, philosophical abstractions, psychological projections, and sometimes sincere attempts to name awe. They are humanity's attempt to speak to the dark and hear a voice answer back. They are our longing for protection, explanation, justice, permanence, forgiveness, control, and meaning. They are ancient mirrors held up to thunder, death, fertility, kingship, love, war, law, guilt, and the sky. Some are beautiful, some are terrifying, some are morally obscene, some are philosophically subtle, but none, so far, have earned belief under the standards Mystrikism applies to truth claims. The Mystrikal position can therefore be put simply, though not simplistically. Gods are not one thing, and they should not be dismissed as one thing. Each God concept must be defined, clarified, and tested in accordance with what it actually claims. If a God is literal, it needs evidence. If a God acts, its actions should matter in observable ways. If a God grounds morality, that grounding must survive philosophical scrutiny. If a God reveals truth, that revelation should be clearer than human confusion. If a God is merely symbolic, it should not be treated as literal. If a God is beyond all description, then no one should pretend to know its will. If a God is indistinguishable from nature, then nature is enough. If a God hides forever from every reliable method of inquiry, then disbelief is not rebellion. It is a common sense and proportionate restraint. Mystrikism does not close the door on reality. It closes the door on pretense. If supporting evidence for a reliable, objective, verified, reproducible, relevant, trustworthy, transparent, empirically grounded, where applicable, logically coherent, and falsifiable godlike reality emerged, then Mystrikism would be obliged to examine it. That is the price of honesty. But until then, we remain naturalistic, agnostic, non-theistic, and unconvinced. Because we provisionally do not know, we provisionally do not believe. Because we value truth, we do not worship mystery. Because we value awe, we do not cheapen it with superstition. Because we value humility, we do not mistake ignorance for revelation. And because we value reality, we let it have the final word. That is how a mystrik approaches the idea of gods. Define them fully, examine them honestly, test them ruthlessly, understand them dispassionately, and dismantle them wherever they fail to inferentially justify themselves.